What's going on, everybody? Welcome. On today's show, is AGI closer than we think? We have a lot of prominent minds in AI who are suggesting that at worst it's 3 to 5 years away, and some are even suggesting that we're mere months or maybe a year away. But on the other side, you have people like Gary Marcus who've laid out really many undeniable statements about saying that suggesting that AGI is really still a far distance away. And maybe even more shocking, maybe we're all focusing and too excited about the wrong technology with LLMs. So when will AGI happen? Will it ever happen? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is the Daily AI Show. Today is March 18th, 2025. And right now, I'm joined by Jimmy, Beth, Andy, and I'm Brian. And I believe Carl will be in here in just a few moments. So I got to tell you guys, as I was researching this one and thinking, like, I'm not sure, what do we have new to talk about with AGI? Um, I really got into Gary Marcus's comments, and we can debate both sides of it or whatever. But I will tell you from just my initial thoughts on this, I think he probably lays out some of the best arguments of why perhaps AGI isn't as close as maybe we all might be thinking about it. And also, you know, why the people who are saying AGI is closer perhaps have some ulterior motives for why they might say that's the case. I mean, we have big public companies that want to make a profit, are trying to get new investing rounds and stuff like that. And so we can imagine, whether we believe it or not, I mean, you guys can tell me what you think, but we can imagine a scenario where the Elon Musk and the Sam Altmans and the Darios of the world and stuff like that would want to say that AGI is perhaps closer than it really is in order to secure new investment rounds and things like that and keep the frenzy going. So before we get into any of the specifics or whatever, I'd love to just throw it over to you guys. Maybe Andy, you can kick us off today. I always try to go around. But Andy, if you want to sort of kick us off today, and we'll kind of just dive into this question of, like, are we wrong about AGI? Is it closer? Is it farther? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that Gary Marcus, who's someone I follow and who's a very important thinker in this space,
Mhm.
a professor and a foil to many of the people who are publishing or are top level researchers and influencers out there. He's a very scientific skeptic, right? With skepticism being an important part of the scientific process, he's a really important voice to listen to there. But my personal opinion is that he's setting a very high standard for what AGI represents. And so when you think of, how AGI can be described, it's kind of like, oh, it's an intelligence system that can do anything that a human can do, not just anything that any human can do, but anything that the very best human can do. And then we'll be able to declare that it's artificial general intelligence. And he brings forward some important arguments around, okay, the intelligence doesn't seem to be perfectly generalizable reasoning, like it shows failures. But my thought is that, boy, humans make those same mistakes too. But we don't accuse any humans. Well, maybe we ought to accuse many humans, but we don't accuse the very best humans of being faultless in their application of general intelligence. So I think that the more important standard, not for declaring AGI, at a certain point in time, but for mobilizing response to the emergence of intelligence of this sort, is when does it reach the level of competence that it displaces humans in a significant way? And when do we reach the point where it's really reliably competent in ways that, may show some faults, but is nonetheless astonishingly more capable than most humans. Now, there are savants out there, and we've all seen things like Rain Man, the movie, and so on. And these were based on real humans, like the calculators back during the war, who were capable of doing things that supercomputers have difficulty doing. But it kind of flows out of their mind. They see these things well because they have not necessarily a generalizable intelligence, but they have a special intelligence. and that special intelligence typically is focused on a certain thing. I think we're going to find in the development of new methodologies for application of large language models and other types of models that are coming about now, like the state-space models, for example, which is a whole different kind of architecture from transformers. I think we're going to see specialized intelligence that's far surpass any human's capability in that special area. Now, so that I to circle it all together, I don't think the AGI test has to be it can outperform any human on any specialized task or intelligence. That's not necessary for AGI, as I consider it, to be arrived at and making profound and disturbing implications for us in society. And so I leave it to you guys to figure out how to solve that problem because I think the ones who are saying that AGI is coming soon, Gary Marcus being one of the people who's saying, not so fast, it's going to be longer. The ones who are saying it's coming soon are raising the alarm bells that we are not responding quickly enough and effectively enough in, in geopolitical ways or in respect of the economy and the market for human labor.
Absolutely.
I
So
wanted to bring this up real quick too, Beth, because bring this into your conversation. Because Greg asked, like, so can you define AGI? And Andy, you kind of did while you were talking. I apologize. I should have started with artificial general intelligence is what AGI is in my opening. But Beth, as you're responding, or Jimmy too, like, isn't this part of the problem? Is the definition? Is it like, sorry, go ahead, Beth, but I want to make sure I got Greg's comment in there real quick.
it it's the definition, but um it's also I think we're too focused on the definition and not focused enough on the consequences or the effects. So when we try to define artificial general intelligence, now we're getting into the like, okay, so if it's better than most humans, what can most humans do? Right? We have not defined a standard at which we say, yes, that's the level of most humans doing something. Like that's not what's happening. The other piece is that when we talk about who is saying that artificial general intelligence is closer than we thought, which is the topic of the show, it actually recently Bob Buchanan, is that his name? Was interviewed on Ezra Klein's podcast. And they were have a bunch of specialties, but they were an AI advisor to the Biden White House. So that's their in on knowing what the government was knowing and talking about and thinking about. Like those are the kinds of things in terms of what is going to happen if this is true. And I'll just go back to Ethan Malik saying for the longest time, you don't have to believe that this is true, but it's a good idea to pay attention to the fact that the people who know the most about these things believe that this is true and believe that there are going to be changes that we're not prepped for yet. Because that's not an invest in me message. Like, I get you, Ryan, that there's like ulterior motive, that kind of thing, but that's not the invest in me message. That's the y'all don't really get what we're doing here, and I get that we see it, a couple years before you do, but, I just think you should, be thinking about things, right? I mean, that's the kind of message that all of them are giving it kind of across the board in that, with the exception of Jan LeCun, who
Well,
says,
okay, so
"AGI should be smarter than your cat," right? And it's not.
I think you're bringing up a good point. Like the people that we have been following. We all follow different people. We all appreciate other people's. I think generally speaking, we all talk a lot about Ethan Malik, and we feel like he puts across a researcher's mind, an educated mind towards it, and doesn't necessarily jump into any one bandwagon or one way or another. So we all respect him in that way. And then yesterday we were talking about Ali Kay Miller, and a lot of people were saying they really respect her mind and how she approaches, in that case, it was enterprise and stuff. But I do think though, Beth, like just to push back a little bit here, like, okay, I mean, maybe Sam Altman isn't worried about the money. We put that on the side for a second, or doesn't want to see the company grow or get to a trillion or 2 or 4 or 6 trillion dollar valuation down the road or whatever. He does come across because of the way they do a lot of the just I'm just sharing with you on X and stuff. It could be very easy to take what he's saying and go like, yeah, I mean, well, who would know better than Sam Altman? Who would know better than Dario? Who would know better than some of these best minds at Google DeepMind who have been working on this forever and ever? But I do also have to always say, hold on a second, what are they currently doing? And why may they or may they not be suggesting that AGI, I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm saying what are the levers at play here for why they might be suggesting AGI is closer or farther away. And then if you wrap in the government side of it, at least from the United States side, of course, there's multiple governments and world leaders working on AGI from their own standpoint. We know China is, we know European countries are. We know this, but you do have to at least look at it and go like, well, what would be the levers they would want to be pulling? And why might they be saying, hey, based on what we can see, AGI is a little bit closer, especially when you have somebody like, God, his name just went over, Gary Marcus, saying like, hey, all you have to do is look at 4.5 and how much of a disappointment that might feel like to a lot of people, despite a lot of years in investment and, billions of dollars in training and stuff to essentially get something that's very expensive and, as Sam Altman says, has a certain vibe to it, and you go, this is 4.5? That's like, unless 5 is some drastic thing and 4.5 was some knee-jerk reaction to what came out of China and other things, and they're like, "We have to put something out." It's weird to think that OpenAI would feel that pressure, but when we just watched Google go through this and trip over their own feet for the last year and a half, and now they're in it, but we all laughed at Google a year ago and said they can't get out of their own big dumb way. They keep doing dumb things and putting stuff out there only for it to be bad or for them to have African American looking native Indians and like they were just dumping things out there. And then you look at 4.5 and you go, geez, I don't know. Is OpenAI scared now and releasing things before they should? Or is it that they don't really have this AGI? And this is the best of what we have right now.
So, wow. Also, the fact that something makes sense to us from the cheap seats watching, admittedly, we live in the cheap seats, we sleep in the cheap seats, we're watching really, really close. But that does not mean that if something makes sense to us, it's actually what's happening, right? Like, it could be that he's interested in the money and he's interested in the potential that AGI massively changes everything.
I'm
It
not
is
saying he's not.
there you're saying that you're looking at the levers and making inferences based on those. I'm sorry, I thought you were saying that,
No, I'm saying
have
we
the
don't know. We don't know, but we should have an open mind to the fact that they might have ulterior motives. Sure. Absolutely. They might have ulterior motives to it. It may not just be because AGI is actually as close as it is. And then it circles back to what Andy initially said, and you were saying too about the definitions. Or Gary's asking or Greg's asking in the comments, which is tell me one unified definition of AGI, because I think Andy, you made a good point about that. Like, I don't know, guys. Here's my point to it. I don't think whatever AGI is and whatever it is, I think we'll see it in pockets. I think Andy, you were saying, I don't want to speak for you. I feel like you were like, we'll see it in pockets and we'll say, wow, that's super intelligence or that's general intelligence in this area. I know, Beth, you're probably laughing at the comments, but it does look like you're laughing at me, just FYI.
No, 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 sorry, Jude.
I know you're looking at the comments, but when you look at the screen, it looks like you're laughing at me saying something serious. I'm just throwing that out there. The I feel like it'll happen in pockets. I feel like we will have it in areas where we go, wow, in that coding or in that area, if we were to generally look at the intelligence of humans, it has far surpassed it. But I also think there's some caveats to that. And I want to hear everybody else's opinion on this. Carl has joined us as well. But I do think when Gary says, like, when we're still dealing with hallucinations and we're still dealing with its inability to do some mathematics, that becomes a problem. And I don't know how to justify that with what you're saying, Andy, but hold on, there's lots of general intelligent humans who can do math well. I'm not so sure that's what we want to base this off of and go, I don't know, it does math better than me. If I don't have a graphic calculator or a scientific calculator, I can't do that math either. Does that mean it's AGI? I don't always hallucinate. I don't always tell falsities. Sometimes my mind isn't perfect. Does that make it AGI? And I think, well, no, shouldn't we hold AGI to a higher standard of near perfect math and no hallucinations?
You may not hallucinate, but my wife will tell you that I hallucinate often.
No,
Eh,
no, I said I hallucinate.
Every time that every time that I say something that I'm speaking to where I'm trying to be authoritative and in effect, without pretense, express something that I believe to be right in some general sense, but is really not founded in any deep research. Well, that's a hallucination. That's a human hallucination. I'm making something up, in effect, in the discourse in order to add my point of view, but I've generated it on the fly without all the citations in effect, right? I don't have the goods behind the scenes. I'm making it up. Okay? That's hallucination. So I don't have trouble, model hallucinations don't trouble me because we have to have the idea that this one model that I'm talking to at this one moment is like one human that I'm talking at this moment. But that one human has expansive knowledge and quite clever and capable reasoning abilities. So I think that I'm working with something that's quite akin to my intelligence when I'm working with an LLM. And I know that LLMs are not necessarily a tool that will get us to AGI. There may be other architectures or combinations of architectures collectively operating together that surpass the simple tests of what AGI should be. So I think you have to kind of go back to the point that what's most concerning about AGI and the rapidly advancing capabilities of artificial intelligence is where and when does this start to impinge upon the normal operation of our human society? And I think we're already there. We're seeing the early parts of that. And I wanted to finish with we all know that all of these companies, they have both a research initiative that is driving their company's internal operations, and they have product initiatives that are trying to monetize in order to justify with a return on investment all of the huge investments that are being made on the research side. And we know that they're not revealing everything that they've got at any one point in time. What's behind the curtains is better than what we're being shown. And this is especially true when you talk about the sort of military and governmental developments that are happening around the world using artificial intelligence. Maybe it's not generalizable, but it's being focused on combat, let's say, and the unique requirements of the war space. Well, we don't have any idea because these are not being revealed. These are top secret programs. We don't really know whether some kind of general intelligence has already been applied in that narrow domain. And this is, I think, where you and I agree, Brian, is yeah, we're going to see these things pop up in certain special applications. And I think that I'm pretty convinced that an artificial intelligence can outperform any human strategist and any human tactician on the battlefield in real time. It's happening, now the question has to jump to ethics. Is it okay that we release an autonomous artificial intelligence, an autonomous AI to make, kill decisions on the battlefield? It's already happening. I mean, drones are released and their simple job is I got to find a human and go kill it.
And you can look at the decisions, like if we're talking about pulling the levers and the motives for talking about it and not talking about it, the motives of a government to not reveal all of the capability. I mean, I think that's just true. In general, I think we don't, at least in the US, reveal everything that we're capable of, right? For a long time, there was an idea, and I don't even know if it still happens in movies, but that it would take like, you have to keep the kidnappers on the line because it takes, like 60 seconds to do the trace and find out who's calling. It does not take 60 seconds, right? Like, that was just a decision that was made that maybe we shouldn't tell people how long it takes or how short it can be. I feel like we make those, government makes those decisions all the time. And if we've seen the AI capability that's released speeding up, we have to assume that we don't know how fast the government's AI is going. Jimmy, I'm wondering what you're thinking about this. Ooh, and I said it right as he picked up a drink.
Well, I just wanted to highlight expand a little bit on what Andy was talking about, and I think what the examples that we're be giving is the reason why AGI is important, right? Because we've talked about hype cycles. We've talked about what are the levers, the motivations between talking about it. So why is it important that AGI is this milestone or marker in artificial intelligence advancement or development? Because it deals with replacement. It deals with uh, offhanding or offloading human tasks to a system that is potentially more efficient in doing it. It's taking human out of the loop. And I think that's the core reason why it's so important to know when this happens. Because you're all right. The definitions are all muddled, right? And OpenAI has a very strong motivation to define it the way they define it, because they have a very large contract that that depends on that definition and when they have achieved that goal, right? And that's going to change their whole approach to things, and that's probably one of the reasons why we've seen this change from nonprofit to profit kind of pathway for them, right? And Andy talked about the investment side of things and people trying to get their return and on investment and things like that. But the larger thinking is this seems to be the flag or the mile marker that people have essentially collectively agreed is this is the point of no return. This is the point in which all of our wildest dreams and all of our terrible nightmares is going to, depending on which side of the argument you're on, that this is going to be the milestone that leads us down that path. And so when you hear some folks talking about you should be aware of this, it's because our AI literacy and AI awareness as a whole is very low. That percentage is still pretty small. And, if you look at the latest top 100, chat things or whatnot, it's still the same ones, in the top 50 and things like that. There's some new things, but that doesn't account for what the global usage, acceptance, day-to-day life is. And Carl was just telling us the other day that there's still tons of resistance in communication with companies and saying, "What is this?" Right? One of 0 to 60's whole job is to make them aware that this is a thing and you need to pay attention to it. Otherwise, you're gonna be left in the dust. So I think it's the overall important thing to take a look at. Every company is gonna have its own motivations. The governments are gonna have their own motivations, and that, interview, I listened to an analysis by the artificial intelligence show about the Ezra Klein Buchanan, interview, and the big analysis that they were drawing from it is the government's concern is national security. That's the way that they were looking at AI. That's how they're interacting and asking the questions of the AI, developers and things like that. And one of those other realizations is AI has this unique position as being this massively emergent technology that was developed in the private sector as opposed to the government sector through DARPA, through, through the development from the Department of Defense and those war applications. Still being used, and that's their primary concern for sure, cybersecurity, national security, all of those kinds of things. But what what this positions them in this larger conversation is they're playing catch up. They didn't invent it. They weren't there from day one. They weren't watching and recording and guiding the development for their own goals. They're catching up and asking someone else, "Oh, what's this all about?" Right? It's someone working in their garage, you know, that that's kind of created this thing that's just blown up coming out of nowhere, essentially. So I'll bookend what my point is that the attention to what AGI is, the important part is we see it and we've collectively de facto created that as the flag or milestone in the road that will lead us down whatever paths we're imagining. And we need to pay attention, and everybody needs to pay attention. I think that's the key thing. Is everybody needs to know and think about it and make decisions and steps towards the outcome alignment of what this is going to be. Because right now, all we're hearing is here's billions and trillions of dollars in development here, and they're just doing whatever they want. It's not we and we're not really paying attention to it. You know how much advancement's gone over the last 18 months, the last 2 years since ChatGPT came out for, and had 100 million users? Immense. Now we're at the point where we're talking about tasks, everyday tasks, just being done by the AI. That's where most people live, is in the everyday tasks. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks for thanks for letting me go on.
Follow-up question, Jimmy, for you, and I'm just curious, anybody can answer it, but I'm just curious, is based on the way you explained it, and you're saying everybody should be prepared, but by the way, I agree with that. I mean, any child, going out into the workforce, yes, you should be thinking hard about the career choices you wanna make potentially before you go throwing money at college and student debt and these kinds of things because of the potential. But that I still my question for that is I agree with that part of it, but in your mind, is AGI and maybe ASI, super intelligence, artificial super intelligence, inevitable?
Yes, I think it is inevitable. I think the genie is out of the bottle. I think now the timeline, I don't know. And what those definitions specifically will be, I can't tell you. That stuff changes all the time. But I do believe that there will be a system that can produce results for you, whether that require, general intelligence, super intelligence. There's going to be an automated system, automated, that's going to be able to produce those results, is going to be able to move whatever your task is forward. How many years? That I'm not sure. But most likely it's just like a performance, right? You're never as good as your best review, and you're never as bad as your worst review. It's gonna be the same. It's gonna be the same here. It's gonna show up way sooner than you think it will be, but it'll probably take a little longer than what everyone else is telling you.
Carl, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, just a couple of points. One is, I think, like, if we were to look back at 2015, I think most of us would probably think that what we have today is some sort of artificial general intelligence because of the capabilities they have. I think the thing that whenever I present to businesses, what I always say is, even if the AI labs determine that AGI is here in 1, 2, 3 years, from a business perspective, it's going to still take a little bit of time to adopt. So I always say 3, 5, 7, 9 years for businesses to fully adopt it, because even if we had whatever everyone concedes as AGI today, it would just take forever just having met over hundreds of businesses the last 2 years, it's not the adoption is it's gonna be super slow. Um, and so that's one. I think the bigger thing is when I was listening to Dario Amodei and Kevin Weil on the Overpower podcast, which is a really good listen to, when he was talking about the whole point, like not AGI, he was talking about coding and how by the end of the year, 99% of coding will be automated, very similar to Dario, where he was saying 100% of coding will be automated or done by AI. I think it's because his reason was the reason why that's democratizing is because anyone can then build. Once anyone can code, anyone can build anything they want. And that was the big thing, right? That's what his focus was. But then what got me a little worried was I was at a panel for the University of Calgary's engineering students on Saturday, and we were taking questions, and just the level of, hey, why am I here? Questions. Um, should I be studying this? Should I be going to school? Are AI gonna take my job? Like, will there be any jobs? Because this is like first, second year students, a couple of master's students. But like, in 3 years, be will I be employable? What skills do I need? And just thinking about what Kevin said and then what the students were thinking, it's like it's a whole new kind of paradigm when they're into the workforce. And that's only about 2 to 3 years. And we always talk about if you start automating the more junior roles, because it's the easiest to automate, how are these how would a junior person entering the workforce become a senior person? Because there's no need for them to do the junior job, learn, fail, gain experience. If you have that, right? So it's like, well,
Well, but
so
Carl, like when you say this, an analogy would be my daughter, your daughter, they still have to learn long division, even though calculators exist. Right? And why? Because they have to understand, well, I'll say at least for my daughter, because it's core math, which I actually like. A lot of people don't. But the idea is you'll see it as parents will talk about it and they'll see this core math. And the general example is like it's whatever. It's a two-digit number plus a two-digit number. And of course, anybody our age go, yeah, okay, that's just do it. And then my daughter would have, this is years ago, my daughter would have a page worth of stuff. And you'd be like, this is the dumbest thing ever. Why would you why would you take a piece of paper, an entire piece of paper to do a two-digit number plus a two-digit number? This is the answer. And of course, it had nothing to do with getting to the answer faster. It had everything to do with like critical thinking skills and steps and working things through. And what you find is that the children that are learning that today can now take much larger numbers than any of us could probably do unless we're just good at math and apply the same critical thinking skills and get to an answer faster than we can. So, right, then the reason I bring that up, Carl, is because like, isn't that what we're going to have in the future? Like, let's just say AGI is inevitable to Jimmy's saying it's inevitable. And any of the kids that you were talking to, the students, the young adults were saying, like, why am I here? And then they're like, also, what is my first job going to be if it's replaced? Won't companies naturally have to do long division in order to teach people, not long division literally, I mean figuratively, in terms of won't they have to teach them the steps and the pieces and to be part of their job description, even though the job can be done for them? Otherwise, how would you develop senior leadership?
well, here's the problem with that. As I mentioned, a majority of the people we talk to, their questions are, "Hey, can I reduce my headcount? I wanna." There's a CEO who's like, "Yeah, I wanna reduce people." Like, straight
Yeah.
up, "I wanna reduce these people." And I was like, "Oh, yes, you wanna teach them, but if you have CEOs and presidents, you're like, 'I wanna reduce people,' straight up, what does that mean?" Right? So
Yeah.
that's what I'm hearing from business. Then when I see the students and then you piece it together and you're like, I'm a little worried because, for me, I'm not. Kinda, but, like, it's different, but when you have students who are like, what am I gonna do?" Like, one thing you could do is obviously the whole, become an entrepreneur, startup field because you have an easier like, AI allows you an easier path to do, but what if you don't wanna do that? What if you
Yep.
want to, contribute to something else, right? So, the it was that, and then plus the Ezra Klein podcast, thinking about that, and then Dario Amodei and Kevin Weil. One of the things I did say is like, hey, the hardest piece of this entire thing, I think, and have to go soon, but like, is it's so tempting. Like the whole point of you going to school too is not just to get a job. It's like, hey, learn how to critically think, learn how to take complex issues, put them together. Hence, you write a paper to say it in a coherent, think it and relay it, communicate it in a coherent way. But it's so tempting that there is this thing that could do this for you, and you don't have to pull all these complex thoughts and put them together. It's so easy for me, like, hey, I want you to this paper, this paper, this paper, this paper. I want you to put a essay, and here's my thesis. Go write it out. It's so easy to do that versus you have to think it. And I told them, I was like, hey, look, the whole point of people giving you these projects and essays is not to get the 95, the 4.5. That's great. But really, it's supposed to teach you how to think and teach you how to read and coherently give you like that, coherently provide your thoughts, which would then translate, if you're in the business world, be able to pull all these things and develop a strategy, develop strategic thinking. But if you're not learning that and you're allowing an AI to do that, you are definitely putting yourself behind. But I get it. When you have you have a 6 course load, it sucks. You know what? There's this thing that can help me out. And so that's the biggest temptation as a very, very tough first student, right? Like I get it. Like I was there. And if I had it,
Or we didn't go into
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna use it because I don't want to write that goddamn paper. I hate it.
Bill, you're a little younger than me, Carl, but I mean, you probably still remember obviously going and pulling cardstock from the library and doing microfiche and doing all these things that we had to do. It was really laborious. I mean, I can think the UGA library, even in college, this is for me 96 to 2000, even though the library is 7 stories tall. And there were days of my life, I feel like in college, where I sat quietly alone in that library and pulled resources from God knows what shelf to do whatever I had to do. And then, yeah, I also had the internet at that time through those years. And there was computer labs, and eventually people had computers in their dorm rooms, by 2000 and stuff like that. So, I mean, we've all gone through these evolutions, right? Regardless of our age, we've all gone through evolutions where something used to be very laborious, but it isn't anymore. But I don't think that necessarily kills critical thinking. What I do agree with you on is, if AGI is inevitable, if it's coming, whether it's 3, 5, 7 years, it's whatever it is, anybody, any of those students sitting there, or anybody listening to this show for that matter, or us and as well, has to be thinking about what differentiators do I bring? What happens if my job gets replaced completely? What if I am a call center whiz and my days are numbered? Do I move to the trades? Do I go into entrepreneurship? So I do think the bigger question here is, like, regardless of when AGI shows up, it's the broader point. I think you brought this up first, Beth, which is you need to be thinking about it. You need to be thinking about how it might affect your life, what makes you happy, all those things, pursuit of happiness, right? And how that affects it. And yes, I do worry about people who continue to throw money at college degrees, because student debt isn't going to help you get to that next thing faster. You could be stuck where you are because of the student debt you have. And that could be a lifelong sentence. We've seen it, So not to get into a whole that's not an AGI conversation, but it's tangentially related, I think, in terms of how people are thinking about AGI. So I don't know, but Carl had to jump, but I think all good points of what he said. It's interesting to hear the students too say, why am I here? Which I
Right.
love that he talked about that. That's telling.
So essentially what we're saying when we're talking about whether AGI is a thing next year, a thing 3 years, a thing 5 years, is we're talking about the time in which your investment can have a return, right? So your ROI, and your ROI for college was like 20 years. Over the course of 20 years, like you'll come out better if you did the thing. Now, with the college getting more expensive and things being less predictable, I would say, or the past being less of a predictor of what's going to happen in the future. So we're in the age of discontinuity in so many ways. But let's just talk about the ways we do on the show. Um, that I think is part of that conversation. And while we hear Carl say, the business owners are always like, "How can I reduce headcount?" And that feels like, "Oh no, like we don't want you to be reducing jobs." They're in that same analysis, right? So, when can I reduce headcount? How am I reducing headcount? Is that something that will create an advantage for my business in an uncertain, discontinuous, whatever, uh, past not predicting the future? I want to have as few hard costs, have to pay them right now as possible, so that I am more flexible when the time in which I can earn a return on investment is unknown or iffy, right?
Yeah, it's a good point.
I want to take a tangent here to the thing that was a little disturbing to me, just even hearing Carl say that, he's in a college, you know, I don't know what it is, like a seminar or he's on a panel in the seminar, and the students are troubled by whether or not it even makes sense for them to be studying this sort of thing. Uh, and I think that there has to be a transformation of global education of next generations to focus on things that weren't necessarily that aren't necessarily attached to a specific economic work position that you're pursuing the necessary skills and training for. It's going to have to be much more general. And learning, for example, in the earlier grades, how to do long division, that's an example of a kind of mechanical arithmetic that shows you that there are steps that can be followed that get you to a conclusion. That's a very simple kind of learning about uh, planning, having a method, planning, and this is what we're teaching AI to do now. Is like on the various deep research models, what it does is it plans its approach, and then it executes that approach, and and it has to know what what are legitimate courses of action, different steps that it can take once it's determined what the objective of the query is. So long division can give you an idea about, okay, I'm going to plan my solution and I'm going to then execute that solution and see if I get to a provable answer. So that's kind of deductive, right? Uh, and there's multiple types of reasoning that you can learn. There's deductive reasoning. There's inductive reasoning, which is like taking a general proposition and then applying it to specific things, like making the leap to say, oh, this generalizable principle, it can be applied to this specific problem and arrive at a solution. And then there's also reductive, like you've probably heard the term reductio ad absurdum, which is a process of logic that says, okay, if I can prove that the opposite of my premise, results in an absurdity, it basically proves the premise, right? So that's reductio ad absurdum. All of those things are difficult conceptually to understand. It takes a lot of experience with them. And what I arrive at is in my vision of what future education would be, it would kind of revert back to the approach that was taken by the Greeks, maybe, which is really trying to possess the next generations with, a better understanding of logic than I think I was given. If you studied logic in college, it was probably in the philosophy department, not so much in math, because math was focused on the more mechanical arithmetic and advanced concepts like calculus and so on, which are important to understand and really are brain teasers that I think help develop young minds. Um, I've never been particularly good at arithmetic, but I'm damn good at higher conceptual math. That works for me. It excites me, but doing long division, doesn't. So I think that we need to start teaching logic much earlier because I find that human general intelligence is really it has a big gap in logic, right? There's a lot of uh, inability to do what we call critical thinking, but that critical thinking is saying, is this really a logical conclusion from the facts and or the basis of the argument that's being presented? And what are the logical fallacies that our minds are by nature prey to? That kind of lesson, I think, is the kind of thing that students today should be learning, not programming necessarily, but they should understand how a machine intelligence translates what you say to it into a logical conclusion and a logical presentation of code. And so, learning programming is never going to go away, I don't think, because I think it's a useful construct, just as long division is, to teach more advanced capabilities in your own mind that will be applicable in your general, day-to-day life, interacting with other humans and being logical and not just, living in a fantasy world of illogic.
And I want to use that as a quick call out to Thursday show. Tomorrow we're going to be doing the news as we always do on Wednesday, but Thursday we're going to be revisiting Model Context Protocol (MCP). We did a show about it back on December 6th, but the reason I wanted to bring it up from what you were saying, Andy, is the critical thinking skills. So we're going to show on Thursday and also discuss it. The difference between using this MCP, and it's okay if you don't know what that is, we'll explain it on Thursday, versus in N8N using it with an AI agent versus using an AI agent directly attached to tools. We've mentioned like Jarvis before on the show and how it's attached to a bunch of tools. And MCP is a different way of doing that, but it's not necessarily always better. And so understanding the underlying ways that prompts working, understanding the critical thinking skills, understanding the gaps of where AI is today, which all comes from basic prompt engineering and just playing and getting in the sandbox and having fun and getting dirty along the way and stuff like that. It does make a huge impact on which way you would use these tools. We're going to have some of the most amazing calm tools, for lack of a better word, agents, whatever you want to call them, even in the physical world with robots, like actual physical robotic tools and things that are going to be part of our lives. But I think back to your point, Andy, whether it's that defined as AGI, whether it's, we all consent, 50 people raise their hands and, or 50 people in a room and 45 raise their hands and say, this thing that you just showed us is AGI for this one thing. And everybody get 45 people go, yeah, we agree. That's better than any human could generally do with that topic. And that's AGI in this scope. And I'm not so sure if we go a little farther outside the rings and, but in this circle here, we're pretty good. We're on the bullseye. But I think you're right. Like when it comes to like what people should be understanding and, how anybody should be thinking and preparing for AGI, regardless of the timeline, since that's something we don't know, it really does go back to what you said, Andy, which is the logic, is what Carl said about critical thinking skills. A lot of that can be learned through math, but obviously in other areas as well. And whether that's I don't know if that's necessarily a major per se. I don't know if that necessarily gets you the job of your dreams, unless that's just what you really love. But hopefully, we're going to see more of this in the first 2 years of a traditional college education, at least in the States, the way the States is done. Those are usually your core competencies. And I agree with you. As we shift towards this, hopefully more colleges are going to take that seriously and be putting that into core competencies because it's such a large part of understanding our future world with AI, how that works with artificial general intelligence. Okay, I don't want to have the last word. So Jimmy, Beth, Andy, where do we want to leave this on? And then, like I said, tomorrow we'll have the news. Thursday, we're going to be talking about MCP, which isn't really AGI, but like you'll see what we're talking about and how, more critical thinking skills. That'll be on Thursday show. Friday show is a 2-week recap show. But before we head out for today, last thoughts on AGI. on everything we talked about, I guess.
So I just want to pop in and say that we've talked about several aspects of where AGI sort of impacts us and where we're making decisions personally about whether we feel like this is AGI or that is AGI. Well, one of the things that Brian, you just pointed to is the idea that my personal perception is relevant in a communal or societal assessment on whether we've reached AGI or not. And I want to go back to the experience that a bunch of parents have had, which is when your kid is tall enough to turn the light switch on or off or can reach the light thing and they're magic, right? They're like, wow, look at my power. I did this because they don't actually understand the mechanics behind it, right? And I couldn't draw the mechanics, like, I'm not entirely sure. I know when I push the button, the thing happens, right? And I don't need to understand that. But if I go through life thinking that I am, more causative of effects or have more contribution to things, then I am slower to understand when something is being effective across the society because my little wheelhouse is still working and therefore I think it doesn't affect me. And that's a piece that I think is part of why I'm doing this show. Like, hey y'all, let's get in the pool and just have a conversation about what it feels like to be in the pool.
Yeah.
Um so that's
Yeah.
my
Hopefully that's what everybody gets when they listen to the show, right, Beth? I mean, I hope nobody walks away from like a conversation today and be like, well, they definitively told me what AGI was, or, the Daily AI show has put a stamp on it. This is the end all be all, whatever. Like, no, I come in one way, I go out thinking a different way. We all have good conversations about it. We all learn from each other. That is the entire purpose of this show. So I'm glad you said that, Beth, because hopefully that's what anybody's getting out of this is just a good, interesting conversation that lets you walk away and hopefully you ponder on it for a little bit and go, that was interesting, or I like what that person said, or that's different than what I was thinking or whatever. And then you use that as part of you know, your knowledge base to use an AI word, to help you make, future decisions for your kids' lives, your lives, how you want to retire, whatever the case may be. So I think that's super, super cool. All right. Unless there's any other comments, we'll wrap it up for today. And like I said, we have good shows coming up the rest of the week. Tomorrow, the news, Wednesday, MCP. We're going to revisit that, but I told you what we're going to be doing about that. That's Model Context Protocol, if you don't know what that means. And then Friday, we're going to have a 2-week recap show, which will give us an opportunity to go look back over the last 2 weeks. Always one of the most fun shows because it's really just an open conversation, but we're touching on different conversations, such as this AGI one today. Thank you, as always, to everybody in the comments for all of your discussions today. Man, there's a lot of comments and some really, really good ones. We always read them, as you guys know, and we think about them and bringing those points into it as well. And I do want to end on what Cisco said a while back, which was perhaps we've already reached AGI. And sometimes you don't know what you have when you're in it, and you may have to look back a couple years later and look back. So perhaps we will. Perhaps we'll look back and go, you know what? Actually, in 2025, that was AGI by these definitions, and we just may not know it yet. So also an interesting idea there. Have a great day. We'll see you guys tomorrow for all the news. Until then, have a great one.
Allah.